Welcome back. I'm talking to Andrew Johnson about Edgar Fouche, who was an avionics and electronics engineer for the US Air Force and contracted to the US Air Force, worked on black projects, secret technologies. Now, one of the systems that he was working on was a satellite communication system at Area 51, and this was in 1979. Just tell us about that, Andrew.
What had happened was he got called up by his boss to say, "Oh, we need you to do a job." And he said, "What job was that?" He says, "I can't tell you, but you need to report to this office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, which he did. And then they basically, it tells this story how he ended up getting on this bus. He might have got on in a car and then went to this other location where they caught a bus, and it was to the Nevada test site. And the bus had sort of blacked out windows and everything. And there was a guy on the bus, with a gun, and they all had to be quiet and not talk to each other. And they drove out to the Nevada test site, and he wasn't, he sort of knew roughly from the type of road and the direction they were going and stuff like that. He knew that. He eventually worked out that's where it was. And then what he found out when he got there was that the person that was meant to do this job, which was on some cryptographics equipment, some communications equipment basically, the person that would normally do it had a bereavement, and so he'd had to take leave for a few days. And so Ed was called up because he was very well qualified and he was trusted. He was called up to do the work instead, and he didn't have to take. They didn't put him under oath that he wouldn't reveal what he did, presumably because it was done at short notice, and it was only I think he called it temporary duty. He was on temporary duty at this thing, and one of the things that he clearly said was, when he got off the bus, they had to put on these goggles which would blur your vision, so you could only see enough in front of you to walk, so you didn't trip over things, and your vision outside of that was completely obscured, so you couldn't see what was there. But he was led into this building and led to where the equipment was. And this, as I say, was in 1979, and he was there for 10 days. So I think the first couple of days he was kind of orientating himself to the equipment, and then I think he had a problem. Fixed the problem, and then the problem recurred, and so he had to go back again. So he ended up being there for 10 days.
So this was a satellite communication system.
That's
right. Probably a box of electronics, some kind of transponder or something like that, which is sending data up to a satellite.
Up to a satellite, that's right. And so he basically had to pull the cards out of a rack, and he looked at these cards and he described, and I put a little picture in the video I did with what's called a VLSI chip, very large scale integration, which is a very advanced type of silicon chip, and this was, you could see the technology was quite a way in advance of what he was used to in other systems. And he had an oscilloscope and I think a frequency meter or frequency counter, and he pulled out this particular card as the one that wasn't working properly, and he put the probes onto the appropriate points on the card, and he looked at the blueprint for the card, the spec sheets, worked out where the test points were, and when he put this onto his scope, he realised two things. The first thing was that the processor was running at 1 gigahertz, and when he looked at the actual signal that was coming off the card and going into the transmitter and receiver, it was running at a frequency which was for voice signal. In other words, it was a higher frequency. It wasn't just for telemetry. Normally for telemetry you use a lower frequency signal, and for voice you use a higher frequency. Just explain the significance
of the 1 gigahertz, Andrew. So the 1 gigahertz is, I think it's 1,000 million cycles a second.
That's right.
And if you put an oscilloscope on a test point on a piece of digital electronics, the microprocessor will run at a clock speed.
That's right.
And that is the fastest part of that board. You won't get a signal which changes faster than the clock speed, because everything is derived from the clock speed.
That's right.
And it decides how the whole thing operates. It's like everything's taking its speed from the clock speed.
That's right.
So just tell us what year 1 gigahertz processors were in the commercial world.
Yeah, well, in the commercial world they started to have the 1 gigahertz Pentium about 1999.
And this is in 1979,
Yes.
but he thinks the kit might have been probably manufactured
4 or 5 years old,
75. So
Yeah.
it's 25 years ahead in terms
Yeah,
of speed.
yeah. So he'd never seen anything like that, and this this thing was called the DOSL, the Direct Orbital Code Link, I think was what it was called, and he picked up this in conversations in the mess hall and the canteen, because they had good food there. You know, he said they had to make the food good there because it was not a very good place to work. You know, because it was out in the desert, and you were away from home for a long time and so on, and you couldn't really talk to anyone much. But one of the things when he was looking at this card, as I said, he realised that there was this voice signal, and he was thinking, well, if this is a voice signal, who are they talking to up in space? Because remember, this is 79, so not only have we only got, like in 79 we had the Commodore PET, and we just about had the Sinclair. And the Sinclair ZX80 ran at I think 3.5 megahertz. So it's it's about 500 times, 400 times slower than this other card. So he was thinking, well, who are we talking to up in space? And of course, the first space shuttle flight I think was 1981, so before the space shuttle. So what's going on?
Yeah. Now with all of these contacts that he had, because he worked with pilots, because he was commissioning a lot of the avionics kit on the aircraft, on secret aircraft.
Yeah.
So he's going to work with pilots, test pilots, and this kind of thing. So one of the pilots that he spoke to has had a theory that UFOs are attracted to some of these extremely fast aircraft because they go up and have a look at them. So we're just going to have a look at a clip from a talk that Ed gave in 1998, where he describes what this pilot told him about this particular UFO sighting.
He has a theory that UFOs seem to like fast aircraft. This SR-71 pilot, Doc, was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base, Okinawa, where the SR-71s were stationed on the SAC side of the base back in 1973. In fact, I think they still are. I was there last time in '81. While flying back across the South China Sea from a reconnaissance mission, he encountered a shadow over his cockpit. Doc said his avionics systems went totally haywire and he felt the aircraft nose down slightly, which can be dangerous at 2,000 miles an hour or 35 miles per minute. When he looked up, he was so startled that he almost panicked immediately. Made evasive maneuvers to his right and down, which is one of the maneuvers they make if there's a missile detected. Doc said the object was so big that it totally blanked out the sun. His estimate was it was 250 feet to 300 feet across. It was oval in shape, but he wasn't sure of the exact shape because there was a shimmering halo of energy surrounding the vehicle. About 3 minutes later, and some thousands of feet lower, the vehicle reappeared on his left wingtip. He tried his UHF, and all he could pick up was a deep electrical hum. He abandoned his attempts, made evasive maneuvers, and for the next 10 minutes, this thing moved about his aircraft effortlessly and stayed right on top of him. Doc said I'm going to quote him exactly, Doc said he got this sound in his head, and his words were, like a swarm of bees in my brain, which is, it's an interesting, must be an interesting sound. The aircraft would move from the left to the right wingtip of his aircraft. It would take about 2 minutes to move back and forth. When Doc returned from his mission, it was the same routine as the earlier incident I told you about. His commander drug him down to his office the minute he opened his mouth about the incidents and gave him a direct order not to talk about it or they'd throw the book at him.
You know, it's the usual story, really, that he knows various people that have had sightings such as that one, and they're all obviously told not to talk about it. I mean, there's one particular one that we discussed, which you and I haven't discussed, Richard. It was an F-15 which crashed into a hillside during a test flight, and that there was a large UFO sighting associated with that crash, and there's quite a lot of information about that which hasn't been put out much. Right. So he has talked about various pilots that have had encounters, and the sorts of circles he was moving in. These were pilots of highly specified test aircraft, or even secret aircraft, like as I say the SR-71.
He said he didn't know one test pilot or SR-71 pilot or astronaut, and he can name most of them and give you their birthdays and their wives' names and tell you where they lived. He said he didn't know one that hadn't had some type of contact. But he also said he didn't know one that would ever come forward and be honest about their experiences for fear of retaliation from the government. You have to realize these people's pensions, which includes their livelihood, their medical coverage, their commissary and BX privileges, the government controls all that.
Another word that we often hear connected with US secret aircraft is the Aurora. And Ed explains that the Aurora is not a craft, it is a whole project of lots of different airplanes. So just tell us a bit about that, Andrew, and in particular the SR-75.
Yeah, so the SR-75, this was a high-speed, top-secret aircraft, and it could travel up to 120,000 feet altitude and go at Mach 5 times the speed of sound, which would go between Nevada and Russia in 3 hours, as a return mission.
And this is in the 1970s?
This is in the 70s, yeah.
All right. Now, another thing that he mentions is the SR-74, which couldn't take off itself on a normal runway, but would be piggybacked and could actually get into space.
That's right. So he said that the SR-75 was a launcher for the SR-74, and the SR-74 could go up to 151 miles, which of course is, the space shuttle was typically around about 130 miles, I think, something like that.
151 miles altitude above the Earth. Yeah,
correct.
So is that in space?
It's in orbit.
In orbit. So it's in orbit.
Yeah.
So in what year we're talking about for the SR-74?
Again, we're talking about sort of 1970s.
Right. So in the 1970s, we've got a plane that can go in orbit when on our TV screens we're all watching. Well, the space shuttle wasn't even invented then, was it?
Well, they were developing it then.
They were developing it, but we had the Apollo missions, sitting watching a rocket 10, 9, 8, 7, and we all think that's technology amazing that can get into space, but the Air Force have got a plane that can go in space.
Right, that's it. He points this out, that the space shuttle, NASA got this sort of hand-me-down technology from the NSA.
The SR-74 can't take off from the ground. It has to be on top of the SR-75 above 100,000 feet altitude. Then it can attain orbital altitudes. The Scramp launches ferret satellites for the National Security Agency that weigh 2,000 pounds or less and measure 6 feet by 5 feet. But as you can imagine, the old satellites that were big as a van, you can pretty much now make one about the size of a briefcase, so you don't need booster rockets. The NASA space shuttle, I'm here to tell you, is really an antique by comparison. The joke is on us. If you think these rumors are far-fetched, look at the YB-49 and the XB-70 flown in 1948 and 1964, respectively. Now look at the SR-75, which has been spotted numerous times. You say the government can't keep a secret? Boy, you're wrong. There's new rumors from my sources. 2 new vehicles have been placed in permanent orbit. One of these vehicles is the Space Orbital Nuclear Service Intercept Vehicle, SUNCIV. When you hear it from another reliable source in 10 years, you'll remember this. It's codenamed Locust. The SR-74 and the TR3B flying triangle can deliver spares, replacement units, service fuels, chemicals, and modules to the SUNCIV, or Locust. The robotic SUNCIV uses deliverables to service, calibrate, repair, and replace parts on the newer NSA, CIA, and NRO ferret satellites. And I know for a fact that they were developing robotic repair of electronics equipment as far back as '81, because I worked a program to where they didn't want technicians looking at the equipment.
Okay. Now, he's mentioned the TR3B there, Andrew, which we're going to come on to, but just to comment on what he said there, that the NSA have got satellites and technology that they can fly to and from satellites that are completely undisclosed to the American government or the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that these are things that are in orbit that no one apart from the NSA are completely secret,
right.
and they're being used for God knows what.
Yeah, and I mean this presentation that we're showing clips from, it's 1998.
Yeah.
So we're already, 15, 16 years on from that.
Yeah. So what have they got up there now?